This is the explanation of the experiment, and it is at the same time probing the activity number 4 in your book, where you have to deduce that the superior nerve center is modulating and inhibiting the reflex action, controlling it based on the results of document E, which we have explained previously. Now we come to the last point here now, which is how does the superior nerve center control the myotatic reflex. Before we start with the explanation, let's have a look at document F, which is found in your book 2 on page 211. I want to call your attention to the alpha motor fiber of the extensor muscle, the TF, which is receiving here, as you would observe, it is going to receive two messages. We have two synapses here, one which is coming directly from the sensory neuron, okay, from the sensory neuron of the extensor muscle itself, the circuit here, starting from the blue coming to the red here. So this motor neuron is receiving a message from the sensory neuron, and it is also receiving a message via an intraneuron here, which is, I think, violet in color, which is coming from the brain. The brain here, message originating from the higher nervous center. This neuron synapsing with the intraneuron, and this intraneuron is synapsing with the alpha motor neuron of the extensor muscle. So as you would see, the alpha motor neuron of the triceps through the extensor muscle, which, as you would recall in the experiment, had showed a lower electric activity, that is, a less force of contraction when its antagonist, the tibialis anterior, was contracted voluntarily. Now, this extensor muscle, the alpha motor fiber of the extensor muscle, as you would see here, is having two messages, one coming from the afferent pathway of the muscle itself, and one coming from the higher nervous center, the superior nerve center, via an intraneuron. So here I'm going to have two messages. Keep this in mind. Now, the mode of intervention of the superior nerve center and the myotatic reflex is as follows. The alpha motor fiber of the extensor muscle, the TF muscle, is receiving, as we said, two different messages. The first one is going to come from the sensory, from the neuromuscular spindle of the extensor muscle itself, that is from the triceps through. So this motor neuron is going to receive two messages, the first one coming from the sensory neuron, which is an EPSP, an excitatory postsynaptic potential, but the second one reaching it is coming via an intraneuron coming from the brain, which is going to cause an inhibitory postsynaptic potential here at the level of the alpha motor neuron. So the alpha motor neuron of the extensor now is receiving two different messages, an EPSP and an IPSP. So what is going to happen here is that this alpha motor neuron of the extensor is going to integrate these two messages by spatial summation, and it is going to elaborate an adequate response. This response is going to differ from the response which is usually found in a normal Achillean reflex when the tibialis anterior was not contracted. It is going to differ in a way that this alpha motor neuron here now, under the action of the superior nerve center, is going to have a reduction in the action potential reaching the extensor muscle here, because it has received two different messages, EPSP and an IPSP. and it is going to add them up by spatial summation, which is going to lead to a reduction in the action potential carried by the alpha motor fiber of the extensor reaching the extensor muscle, which is going to decrease in the intensity of contraction of the muscle. And by the way, this notion here is found in the official exam and the following two sessions, 2011 first session and 2017 second session. You can refer to them for practicing. So if we're going to use this gathered notion in order to explain the electric activity of the triceps theory and the experiment that we have seen before in the three cases, we're going to explain it as follows. First, in case of the normal Achillean reflex, when the superior nerve center does not interfere, that is, when the flexor, the TA, the tibialis anterior, was not contracted, the alpha motor neuron of the extensor muscle, this alpha motor neuron here of the extensor muscle here, is going to receive only an excitatory message coming from this afferent neuron, this afferent pathway. So it is going to receive an EPSB, and this is going to cause it to generate action potential in the axon, which is going to reach the extensor muscle, the triceps theory, and cause it to contract. Remember, this is the case where the antagonist, the tibialis anterior, was not voluntarily contracted at all. It is the case of a normal Achillean reflex. Now, in the second case, as you would recall, before I continue, this is why if I would remind you of the tracing that we had seen before, where it showed a very high amplitude of electric activity. Now we go to the second case when the TA, the tibialis anterior, was slightly contracted voluntarily, that is, under the action of the brain. So here, when the flexor muscle, the TA, is slightly contracted voluntarily, the alpha motor fiber of the TS, of the extensor, is receiving two messages as we had explained previously. One excitatory from the afferent fiber, from the afferent pathway, and the other inhibitory, which is coming from the superior nerve center, which is via a polysynaptic pathway. Now this alpha motor, as we have explained, is going to integrate the two messages, the EPSB here and the IPSB here, okay, by spatial summation. Now, as the excitatory message in this case is slightly important than the inhibitory one, it will cause the generation of action potential here, but of lower frequency than before, than in the first case when the TA was not contracted at all and the brain was not intervening at all. So here in this case, due to the intervention of the brain, this motor neuron, as we said, is going to have the EPSB and the IPSB, but the EPSB is slightly higher, slightly important, so it would generate action potential of lower frequency than in the first case, which are going to reach the extensor muscle and provoking a weak contraction of the triceps theory, the extensor muscle. Finally, in the third case, when the flexor muscle, the TA, was strongly contracted voluntarily, what is going to happen here is that the inhibitory message here reaching the alpha motor neuron of the extensor is going to be more important than the EPSB reaching it. So what is happening here is that the alpha motor fiber is not going to generate action potential, and no action potential will reach the extensor muscle here, and as a result it is not going to contract. The answer to the explanation here, explaining the role of the motor neuron of the triceps rear during the Achillean reflex in each of the situations studied in document E, is probing the activity number 5, and this is the answer. This is the end of our session and the end of the chapter concerning the myotatic reflex. Thank you for watching.